It's interesting observation. There's a law that if you live in Israel, or you have the produce of Israel, the 5 grains, the 7 species, before you're permitted to partake of them, they have to be tithed. It's a Torah law. They have to be tithed. The first tithing you give to the Kohen. The second tithing, which is 10%, you give to the Levi. Then you take a second 10%, and it depends on what year of the sabbatical cycle it is. The first 2 years of the sabbatical cycle, that's called the second 10%, you take it to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, and you're only permitted to eat it there. It has a sanctity. During the third sabbatical year of the cycle, you give it to the poor. You give it as charity to the poor. You have no right to partake of it. And then the cycle repeats itself. 4 and 5, the second 10% you take to Yerushalayim. The 6th year, you give it to the poor again. The 7th year is the sabbatical year. It's onerous, which we're going to read about next week. In the portion of Bar, that's the sabbatical year. Everything's onerous. Now, the second tithing, which is called Maser, which is a 10th, you have to give a 10th. If you don't give the 10th, it's not a valid tithing. And that 10th is given to the Kohen. The first tithe is given to the Levi or the Kohen, either one is qualified to receive it. The first tithing, the rabbis gave percentages. Generous percentage is you give 1/40th of whatever you're tithing. Mediocre is 1/50th. Inferior type of tithing is 1/60th. But if you tithe it and give the 60th, then that becomes what we call truma. That becomes holy, and you give that to the Kohen. And only the Kohen is eligible and qualified to eat that. Nobody else is permitted to eat, him and his family. It cannot be eaten in a contaminated state. But if one takes all the tithings as he's supposed to, what remains takes on an ordinary status, and everybody's permitted to partake of it. Even if you're not a Kohen, you're not a Levi, even if it's contaminated, you're permitted to consume it. That's the law. But as I mentioned, the first tithing, which is either a 40th, 50th, or 60th of the harvest, that's all rabbinical. On a Torah level, even if you have 5 tons of wheat, and you take one kernel, and you say, this kernel I'm designated as the truma, the first time you give to the Kohen, that tithing impacts on the tons of truma, of grain, that grain becomes ordinary grain. Could you imagine? One kernel absolves that whole, whatever it is, that volume, that now it becomes permitted to eat because you tithed it, although you only took one kernel. But as much as you take a 50th, that 50 takes on that holy status. But even if you take one kernel, that takes on that holy status, and the rest is absolved. Where do we find such a thing? That although it's minute, the minute is able to absolve volume endless times of what it is, although quantitatively it's so much more. Where do we find such a thing? Now, the Torah tells us, what is the objective of creation? Why did God create this world? He created the world, the Navi says, for his own glory. That if we recognize his glory, then we're worthy of having a relationship with him. Now, how do you recognize his glory? Through the observance of the Torah. He gave us a mandate. He gave us a prescription of life that if you live within the protocols of Torah, that is a basis to recognize who he is, and you're subordinating yourself to his will, and therefore that's a base to have a relationship with him. That's the concept. Now, which people have the capacity, who have the spiritual core, that they have relevance to live within this protocol, to have a relationship with God? Only one people. the Jewish people. Nobody else. Where is it alluded to in the Torah? It's alluded to in the first two words of the Torah. Bereshis bara. Bereshis bara. What is the word? In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, He created. The Shril Yisrael Sharitnik Rashis. The world was created for the Jewish people who are called the chosen. Rashis means the chosen. For the sake of the Torah, which is called the chosen, the choicest. So the mandate is the Torah. That's the choicest. And the people that have relevance to that were also the chosen. That's the Jewish people. Now, where do we find that the Jewish people are referred to as the chosen? So Rashi cites the verse which the Minchas cites, because the prophet says, name of God, the Jewish people are rashis through oso. You're the first of the grain. You got it? The Jewish people are the equivalent of the first tithing of the grain. That's where we find the Jew is associated, Jewish people, with the word rashis, the chosen. Now, the Mishnah tells us that the innate value of one Jew has greater value than the whole world combined, all humanity combined. Talking. You have 8 billion people in existence. One Jew, one solitary Jew, his innate value, his neshama, his soul, has greater value to God than 8 billion people. They also have souls. But qualitatively speaking, it's less than infinitesimal compared to this one person. So what is the concept of the Jewish people? One is the equivalent of all. Because since innately it has that spiritual core, which is unfathomable, which is unlimited, the world is finite. The billions of people are finite. So that's quantitative. The Jewish people are qualitative. The qualitative core is spiritual. It's unending. It's not finite. Therefore, the less is the equivalent of the more. This is the understanding. As a result of that, what is the tithing of the wheat? We say the Jewish people are the equivalent, the Navi refers to us, rashis to us, the first of the wheat. So the Jewish people are like that one kernel. So therefore, when you take one kernel from even tons of wheat, what is that kernel? That kernel becomes holy. The rest of the wheat becomes ordinary. The holy versus the ordinary, it's a different dimension of existence. What's holy is not finite. What's mundane and ordinary, that's finite. So therefore, one kernel, which is holy, absolves tons and tons of wheat, which are ordinary, which are purely physical and material. So what the Jewish people are to the world, that's what the tithing of the grain or the produce is versus the rest of its quantity, regardless of whatever that quantity may be. That's the concept. Could you imagine? Person shops at the big man store. There's a place, it's right off 6th Avenue. Big man store. Meaning if your size is 60 and up, that's where you shop. Okay? And of course you wear a long. You can't wear a short or any of these other types of portly. Maybe if you're portly and you're a big man, you go to a big man shop too, if you're portly. Okay? You have shoes, size shoe 15, that's where you buy those kinds of shoes. Yeah, this is after size Sims closed down the stores. There you could also buy those kind of clothing. Okay. Okay, little humor. So could you imagine you take this person, this big man, and you take him to a midget shop and you try to outfit him. He can't get his toe into the pants. Forget about his leg. Lahavdil. The souls of the non-Jews that make of the soul has no relevance to what God is. Literally no relevance. It's like a person would have a thread on his leg. It's not even noticeable. That's not called a relationship. You have no relevance. So the Jewish soul, when it was created with a capacity of unlimited, because it's meant to have a relationship with a being that's unlimited. Of course, it's not the equivalent of that because God is infinite. Everything else is finite versus infinite. But in terms of not finite, the soul has that characteristic of not finite. Therefore, the soul has relevance to God. However, the soul has to be worthy and has to address many issues to advance it, to address its potential, to expand to that level of overcoming all finite. And how do you do that? By weeding yourself from the physical, which is finite, and only using the physical as a means, not as an end. That contributes to expand the potential to border on the infinite. Once you take on that persona of semi-infinite, now you have relevance to the infinite. Therefore, we have relevance to God. But if, let's say, you live within the finite, you go to that five-star restaurant and you never leave it and you stay there. They say, what are you here for? Because that's what life's all about. To live, at the country club and live in the restaurant and live in Monaco and, put yourself in a solitary confinement in a 4x4 cell. If that's what life's all about, that's your capacity. That person has no relevance to anything which is beyond that finite material reality. So if you live a life of finite, you are finite. You live a life of infinite. You address the needs of the soul, which is using the material as a means, not as an end. Because we are human, we have to eat, we have to maintain ourselves. Then the material, the finite, becomes part of the infinite. We're going to read next week. It's the closing portion of the book of Vayikra, Chokosai. And it says over there, we speak about the blessings and the curses. It's known as the Tocha, that if Jews, God forbid, don't behave themselves, Holocaust is an understatement what, God forbid, could happen to the Jewish people. Literally, the level of suffering is not imaginable. What, God forbid, that could happen. But if you toe the line and you live as God wants you to live, and you toil to advance your spirituality, Torah says the bounty is unlimited. Unlimited bounty. You won't even have a place to store that bounty. Not only that, normally you have to eat a certain volume to sustain the body. In the words of Chazal, you'll eat a morsel, and the morsel will sustain you as if you're eating the volume. What is it all about? If you follow my statutes and you toil in my Torah, you're willing to give it all up to toil. So what does that mean? That means you're compromising your physicality to use it purely for spirituality. If you do that, what is your value? Your value is spiritual. Of course, if you're physical, how do you not focus on the physical for the sake of the physical? The Jew understands the value of the physical is only to facilitate the spiritual. So to your best ability, you dedicate yourself to advance the spiritual. As a result of that, who are you? You're not a finite person. Because you're not living within the confines of the finite. It's only a means to an end, which is infinite, which is God. So what is the blessing? God says, I'll give you bounty that you're not going to know where to put it. That it's going to be so unlimited, you can't fathom what that bounty is going to be. But why is that the result? Because when you plant that quality seed, what grows? Whatever you planted. If your essence is this person who's not finite, what is the result of your actions? Unlimited. But if God forbid you live a life of finite, like an intellectual animal, Limited to that, you have no relevance to the infinite. As we discussed, if you have no relevance to the infinite and God withdraws from you, what happens? All kinds of problems set in. Decay, decomposition, bacteria, atrophy, everything atrophies, disease. And that's the tocha. That's the Holocaust we're talking about. And that's what we speak about in the portion. And therefore, you can eat a morsel. You eat a morsel of food, minuscule. You're sustained, you're nourished. But how could it be? The body needs so many calories. The body needs so much nourishment. How could one kernel nourish you and sustain you for whatever you need to? Maybe. You know why? Because you're a person which you have no relevance to volume. Volume has to do with finite. Living a life of a spiritual being, that the value of the physical is purely for the spiritual. So space, time has no relevance to you. If that's the case, you can eat a minuscule, and the minuscule is the equivalent of more. And therefore you could be sustained even on the minuscule. We speak about going to war. It says, if you follow my ways, when you chase your enemy, one of you will chase 1,000 of the enemy. Could you imagine? One person chasing 1,000 enemy. We're not talking about you chasing a bunch of seagulls. We're talking about this is really a formidable foe. But when you go to battle, one Jew will chase 1,000. How's that possible? Because if you go and live the life which we're discussing, that you're not living a life of the finite, but you're living a life of the spiritual, that the materialist value is only the infinite. So if that's the case, number has no relevance to you. One chasing 1,000, pursuing 1,000 of the enemy, it's not a big deal. Because again, your value is not your finite number or your limitation. You will have no limitation. Therefore, one will chase 1,000. And that's what it says explicitly in the Torah. If you toil in my Torah and you sacrifice my Torah, when you go to battle, one will chase 1,000. Now we read about the story of Avram Avinu. Avram, he gave his life for God. He went to the kiln. God performed the miracle. He came out of the kiln. When he left to go to Canaan, his nephew Lot went with him. He had a nephew Lot. It was his brother's son, whose brother went into the kiln and did not come out of the kiln. Lot was taken captive by the four mightiest powers of the world. And why did they take Lot captive? Because they used that to bait Avram, because they saw Avram as a zealot, which was unstable. And they figured if they take him, he's going to go to battle and they'll kill him in battle. And there'll be this end of this new monotheistic movement, which is called Abraham's boys. You come to an end of that. You know, you have the Abraham Accord. This is called Abraham something else. Right? They figured they'll take him, draw him into battle, and they'll destroy him. These are four mightiest powers. Little did they know, they didn't know who Avram was. Avram has a backer where nobody could stand up to his backer. He has God behind him. He takes shoots of straw, throws it, they turn into spears. He takes sand, throws it, it turns into what? Into the equivalent of grenades, shrapnel, destroys the enemy. One man. How did have one man go against the four mightiest powers? Avram is depicted by the Torah as the Ivri. What does Ivri mean? The way it's said is Hebrew. But Ivri means he's from the other side. So the Medrash tells us, Avram me'ever echod, v'kol ha'olam me'ever sheni. Avram was on one side of the world, and the rest of the world was opposed to him. He took on the world single-handedly. You hear this? Are you out of your mind? You have to pick up a boulder with that's 1,000 tons. Could you pick it up by yourself? No, can't do it yourself. But if you have God assisting you, and all of a sudden there's no gravity, just rises by itself, you just touch it, go straight up. Avram was me'ever echod. Why was he singled out? Why was he one side of the world taking on the whole world? The whole world was opposed to him. Why was the world opposed to him? Because they were pagans. Avram, what was his position? Monotheism. The creator the infinite being. That's who I am. I live my life for the infinite. I have relevance to the infinite. My relationship is with the infinite. I don't live a life of finite. If that's the case, Avram single-handedly takes on the world and he destroys them. We read about Yosef. He became the viceroy of Egypt. How did he become the viceroy of Egypt? He was rotting in a dungeon for 12 years. All of a sudden, the king of Egypt has a dream. Like another guy once had a dream. I had a dream. Okay? And Selma, Alabama. I had a dream. Okay. So Pharaoh had a dream. And he called all his wise men, his dream interpreters, fell on deaf ears. So the wine steward says, I was in prison and we had this Hebrew, this unstable subhuman being with us, and he has the power to interpret dreams. Give him a shot. Calls him out, they pull him out of the dungeon, they clean him up, they groom him, give him a new suit of clothing, and he listens to the dream. And he says, we hear that you have the ability to interpret dreams. He says, no, it's not me. It's God. God speaks through me. It's God, it's not me. I have no special powers, no ability, it's God. And again, when he gives the interpretation, he says, God is communicating to you what you have to know for your best interest, for the sake of the survival of Egypt. There'll be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, and immediately he gives him a solution how to maximize on the plenty so the country should survive the famine. Appoint one person, oversee it, store away the food, the grain, the produce, and so on and so forth, and that will be in storage to guarantee the survival of the country. And Egypt will become the wealthiest nation in the world, because all the wealth has come to Egypt. He gives them the solution within 5 minutes. Something the United States government spends hundreds of millions of dollars how to work out the economy without paying the head of the Federal Reserve and this one and that one to figure it out. Within moments, he gave a plan which was so perfect. Paro says, Paro was the king, the monarch of the most advanced civilization. And he says to his courtiers and his wise men, have you ever seen a man who has the spirit of God in him? He didn't say, have you ever seen such a genius? His genius is not human genius. His genius is divine genius. It's divine. Yosef is speaking to a pagan king. He's the head of a pagan civilization. God will answer, will bring peace to you, Paro. God is communicating how to deal with this. You're talking to a pagan. This man believes in deities, and you're speaking about an infinite being. Yosef speaks. That's who Yosef was. I am that. I reflect him. My value is him. My value is not me. And through me, therefore, because my value is him, not me, therefore I'm the conduit for him to communicate to you exactly what you're supposed to do. So when Paro appreciated this, how did he come up with a solution within moments? This is not human genius. This is godliness. He recognized Yosef wasn't an ordinary person. This is not a physical person. He's physical in his makeup, but his innate value is what? Is spiritual. He's an unlimited person. As the bounty was unlimited during the years of plenty, the one who gave the solution is an unlimited person. And when he actually put the plan into effect, there wasn't a hitch in the plan. And all the wealth of the world came to Egypt, unlimited wealth. And it says, when they gathered the bounty, there was no number they could use, and they exhausted all numbers. What comes after a trillion? They soon have to come up with a new number. That's the deficit of the United States government. I don't know. There's no number for after a trillion. They're going to have to invent another number. There was so much bounty in Egypt, there was no number to count the number any longer. Meaning it bordered on unlimited. You hear what's going on over here? What's going on? This is to quantify Yosef, who Yosef is. He's an unlimited person. Because since he lives his life for the unlimited, for the infinite, therefore he has relevance to the infinite. The Jewish people, if we're going to be worthy of blessing, to be worthy of the unlimited, and the one could chase 1,000, which means number means nothing, because we don't live a life of finite, then what? Then we merit a relationship with him, and therefore we take on his persona, an unlimited persona. You know, it's interesting. The core of Judaism is the Torah itself. The Torah that was given at Sinai. The obligation to study Torah is continuous. You must engage in Torah study day and night. Of course, we have to sleep, we have to eat, we have to relax. That's okay. But why are we relaxing and eating and sleeping and vacationing? It's only as a means to go further. But the mitzvah of study of Torah, which is the fuel, and that's the antidote, which allows us to grow and advance, it's a continuous process. What is the concept of continuous? It's without a stop. It's unlimited. There's no stopping. Why is there no stopping? You work from 9 to 5. You work from 8 to 8. Everything's within limits. When it comes to Torah, God says there's no limits. Whatever your capacity is, that's your capacity. Unlimited. Why? Because the Torah itself is a means to an end, is to have a relationship with God. And as God, to have a relation with him, as he's infinite, for you to be unlimited, to have relevance to the infinite, you have to engage in a process which is unceasing for that reason. That's why you get spiritualized in the context of unlimited to be able to have a relationship with the infinite for that reason. The miracles of Egypt. Originally, they thought it was sorcery. After a while, they realized this is not sorcery. This is the hand of God. Because those consequences of what happened, they were the exports in sorcery, couldn't happen through sorcery. This is God's hand. How do you take earth and turn it into lice? How do you take water and turn it into blood? How does every firstborn, where only God knows who that is, dies? And if a woman committed adultery with 10 men who never fathered a child before, that means 10 of her children are firstborns of the paternal, they all die. Who's privy to this? There's only one being who's privy to this, that's God himself. Because every deity is limited to his area of power. The sun has its power, the moon has its power, the god of fertility has its power. That's deities. Deity means limitation. God is the omnipotent being. He's unlimited. He's what we call the Kol Yoch. He's the Almighty. God is Almighty. There's nothing, it's not only Almighty, it says God is infinite. So whatever we say is Almighty within the context of what we understand is might. So he's Almighty, but he's beyond Almighty, God. So if you have an understanding and a belief, and you live and you sacrifice and dedicate to the Almighty, then you assume a persona of unlimited, and therefore you can have a relationship with him. Therefore, it's like the one kernel of wheat. Therefore, one Jew is the equivalent of the whole world. The whole world is finite. The one Jew borders on the infinite. But it's 8 billion versus 1. You don't get it. I'll give you an example. You have 100 trailers of steel. You have one truckload of platinum. You say, you see this, that? Or you have a pouch of diamonds. A pouch which is no more than a pouch which has a 32-ounce capacity. And you put in that pouch 15, 40-carat deep flawless diamonds. You can have 10,000 truckloads of steel. See, in this bag is more than that. Doesn't make sense. You could build bridges with that steel. You could build skyscrapers with that amount of steel. Doesn't make a difference. The innate value of what's in this bag is more than everything. The innate value of the Jew has no relevance to finite. Therefore, he's the equivalent of the whole world, even though there are 8 billion people. Tell you a story. Mr. Glick, he should live and be well. He's turning 99 now. And he himself, when he was younger, was like a lion. He had a spirit, he had a genius, he had a personality, one of a kind. And he did tremendous things in his lifetime. And he was the diamond king. And he had diamonds, which the princes of Saudi Arabia were his clients. Marcos from the Philippines was a client of his. Everybody shopped at Louis Glick. And there was a certain two Iranian brothers, not Jews. They opened a clothing store on Fifth Avenue. King Juan Carlos, the king of Spain, used to have his suits. He used to buy suits in this shop. If you had a suit, custom-made suit there, only custom-made, the suit cost no less than $10,000. And they sold all kinds of accessories. And they sold shirts and belts and shoes and socks, all for the best-dressed man of royalty. They sold those kind of clothing. So high society shop there. Okay? So if you wanted to change your tax bracket, you went in there for a day, shopped. Next day, your tax bracket, you go into a lesser tax bracket. No question. Okay? So these two Iranians, you could imagine how pompous they were, how arrogant they were. You know what kind of customers they had? They would only allow a certain echelon of society to shop at that shop. They're arrogant, you can't imagine. So they got an idea. They're going to sell for men's jewelry Louis Glick's diamonds. And they'll have it inlaid in cufflinks and whatever it is. So together, royalty in the shop there, they'll have these diamonds as part of men's jewelry, men's accessories. So they come up to Louis Glick's office when he was in 587 Fifth Avenue, which Shia Gold had an office in the same building on Fifth Avenue. And they come up to him and they make an appointment, the two brothers, and they sit down and they're looking at him, and Mr. Glick. He's sitting there, with his sweater in his office, and he's wearing his yarmulke on his head, not his kippah, his yarmulke, and he has his loop around his neck, and he has little pouches of diamonds on his table, and they start telling him what they want to create. And they keep saying to him, do you know who we are? I forgot what it was an Iranian name. With this and with this. And do you know who our clientele is? Do you know who we are? Do you know what it means if we'll be the outlet for your diamonds? Do you know who we are? Louis Glick had a short fuse for this kind of stuff. Louis Glick had a few diamonds in his hand. He says, I want to tell you who I am. He says, you see the few diamonds in my hand? You could take your shop and quadruple it 10 times over. It's not worth what I have in my hand. Get out of here. He threw him out on the heads. He says, your arrogance doesn't belong here. Go somewhere else with it. I don't need it. What I have in my hand is worth more than you'll ever have. Well, you'll make in 10 years. And he dismissed them. You understand? I have so many soldiers. I have so many this. I have that. One little Jew. His innate value is more than 8 billion people. You could take Putin, and multiply him with every head of state, with all the nations. One Jew is more than all of them. How? Because they're all finite. The Jew is not finite. The essence of the Jew is unlimited. But if he lives a life of finite, in terms of relation with God, that's a different story. But even then, he still has a potential. Since he can do tshuva, he can repent, he still has relevance to the infinite. Therefore, his innateness is still more than the 8 billion people.